13. Broken Dolls. The Odd Sisters lay on the floor of the solarium under its massive glass dome. Nanny and Circe had decided to leave them where they had collapsed for fear of harming them, though Circe wondered how they could be harmed any more than they already had been. She couldn't detect any life force in them. To her, they looked like broken, lifeless dolls. Their eyes were still wide open, slightly bulging from their profoundly darkened sockets. She was saddened to see their white cheeks deeply stained with black streaks from long hours of crying before their collapse. Their red lipstick was smudged and settled into the lines of their mouths. Around their mouths. It made Circe upset to see her sisters in such a state. Even though she could no longer feel their presence, she knew in her heart that somehow they were still in the world. Just not in this world. Muttering a quick incantation, Circe fixed the Odd Sisters' makeup, curled their onyx ringlets, straightened the feathers in their hair, and righted their beautiful voluminous dresses, made of black silk with a cascade of silver stars, resembling the night sky. If Circe had to delay finding the spell to wake them, the least she can do was give them their dignity. They would have looked peaceful if she just could have closed their eyes. But Circe thought perhaps it was better that they were open. She didn't want to forget her sisters required her help. Circe only wished she could wake them as easily as she had made them look presentable again. I hope they're okay wherever they are. Do you think they'll ever wake up? It was Flans. The feline had been watching Circe silently as she'd helped her sisters. Seeing her witches motionless on the floor sent a chill through Flans's heart. She was afraid she would never speak to them again, never feel the touch of Ruby's hand or the soft brushing of Lucinda's lips on the top of her head, or feel Martha tugging on her ears. Stop fretting, Flans. We will find a spell to wake them, I'm sure of it. Turning from her sister, Circe looked at Flans. She took in the cat's beauty, dazzled by Flans's golden eyes, flecked with green and rimmed with black. They were striking against the vivid patches of orange, black, and white on the cat's face. You really are a beautiful creature, Flans. Keep watch over them. I'll be back. Are you going to enchant the door? I feel uneasy with my witches so defenseless, especially if Maleficent is on her way. Of course. Don't worry, Circe said. She quietly closed the door behind her as not to disturb her sleeping sisters and their loyal guardian. With a wave of her hand, Circe created a powerful barricade around the room. Only those with a pure heart and noble intentions would be able to open the door. No one who intended to harm the sisters would be able to enter the solarium, and no magic would be strong enough to break the spell. Not a spell woven in love for the protection and safety of her beloved sisters. Chapter 14. Convergence. Owls, crows, pigeons, and dragonflies were arriving at the Morningstar Castle in siege numbers. Messages from every kingdom and every corner of the magical realms were still flooding in. Many were inquiring about the great magnitude of power that had erupted from Ursula's death and whether it had been taken care of. Some of the messages were simply offers of condolences for Ursula's passing. Nanny had time for none of those. She would reply when she had dealt with Maleficent. But one message would not wait. It was from her sister, informing her that a group of fairies was on its way to help her handle the Odd Sisters situation. That was the last thing Nanny needed, a bunch of fairies descending upon Morningstar while Maleficent was there. Why in Hades does the world choose to fall apart all at once? Leave it to my sister and her silly wish-granting fairies to meddle in the things that do not concern them. Nanny wondered if it was all a ruse to confront Maleficent. She found it difficult to believe the fairy godmother cared about the Odd Sisters. No, she was just being paranoid. How would the fairies even know that Maleficent was on her way to Morningstar? The fairies were coming to discuss the Odd Sisters. Miss High and Mighty Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo was coming to cast judgment on the Odd Sisters. Simple, straightforward, nothing to worry about. Nanny's gut instincts nagged at her. No. This convergence will be disastrous. She was sure of it. Nanny felt overwhelmed, not only by everything that was happening, but also by the rapid-fire recollections that continued to flash through her mind. It was strange. Her memories were flooding back, but Nanny couldn't remember how she lost him in the first place. You probably put a spell on yourself to forget. Seems like something you would do, Cersei said from the doorway, interrupting Nanny's thoughts. Cersei was probably right. It was highly likely that Nanny had caused herself to lose her own memories as a way to deal with the pain of her failure to protect Maleficent. It was horrible enough to remember all her own regrets, but to remember Maleficent's memories in such vivid detail was breaking her heart. It was no wonder she had chosen to forget. Nanny switched the subject, trying to avoid the memories for just a moment. How are your sisters? Any change? Cersei shook her head. No. Nanny looked sad, lost in her thoughts. She didn't say so, but Cersei could tell she was also dreadfully concerned about the odd sisters, and she was worried about Maleficent. I don't want you to worry, Cersei said finally. I know we will find something to wake my sisters, and as far as for Maleficent, you have plans. You have Tulip, and of course, you have me. We're here. There's nothing Maleficent can do to you with us beside you. I'm more worried about my sister and her goody-goody friends, honestly, Nanny said, handing Cersei the fairy godmother's message. They're also on their way. Cersei narrowed her eyes. That is a problem. Is there no way to turn them away, to tell them that they're not wanted? Nanny shook her head. My sister never imagines a situation in which she isn't welcome. Telling her she wasn't wanted wouldn't even register. Turning her away isn't an option. She'll simply look at me blankly and pretend not to understand what I'm saying. Cersei sighed. Why is she coming? You don't think she's the one who put my sisters to sleep, do you? I honestly don't know. I assume they were sleeping because it took so much of their strength to fight the spell they created to help Ursula. Nanny explained. But they still won't wake up. Nothing I've tried has helped. Nothing you've done has worked, and now I'm wondering if the fairies have somehow intervened. Cersei's eyes flashed with anger. Intervened? How? If they hurt them? No, their magic doesn't allow them to hurt anyone. Not even their enemies, Nanny said. And your sisters have never been their enemies. Not really. Yes, they've sided with Maleficent in the past. The Odd Sisters have helped her before, but they've never hounded the fairies. It seems my sister's been stepping out of her providence lately. She's taking her role of fairy godmother too far. Princess Aurora is not her charge, but if she has taken it upon herself to cast an endless sleep on your sisters, I'd wager it's for the protection of her beloved princesses. Cersei frowned. I thought Cinderella was her only princess. She is, and is living happily, but I suspect my sister may be growing weary with not much to do. So she's putting her round little nose in where it doesn't belong, Nanny sighed. Enough about my sister. I just hope she doesn't bring those insufferable little sycophants, the three good fairies, with her. You have no love for fairies, do you, Nanny? Cersei asked with a smile. I don't blame you. If it's any consolation, I don't see you as a fairy. In my heart, you're a witch and always have been. Thank you, dear. Your sisters once said something quite similar to both me and Maleficent. Something about being born a fairy but having a witch's heart. I suppose they were right. Cersei considered that. Well, if you think about it, a fairy can just as easily be a witch as a human might, if she's capable of the right sort of magic, but with you, there's a little more to it, I think. It's what I see in your heart. You don't share fairy sensibilities. Too right, and I thank you, my dear, but... Nanny was interrupted by a loud knock on the front door of the castle that made them both jump. Nanny's heart sank. She wasn't ready to face Maleficent yet. Cersei took Nanny's hand and squeezed it, reminding Nanny she was there to protect her. How Nanny wished she had always had Cersei in her life. What would it have been like always to have such a young, powerful witch willing to do good by her side? A witch who had an open heart and none of the bigotry that ran so deep in the fairy community. Nanny had been preparing herself for Maleficent's rage, but she wasn't quite ready to meet it. She wasn't ready for the condemnation. Maybe when Maleficent saw Cersei, she would see it in her heart and see Nanny through Cersei's eyes. And maybe she would hold less judgment in her own heart for Nanny by virtue of the love Cersei held for her, an old woman who only now had remembered who she really was. Hudson came into the room with a grave look on his face. He was pale and seemed very uncomfortable. What is it, Hudson? What's the matter? Who's here? Nanny asked. It's Queen Snow White, ma'am. She sent a message. For the love of all things good, what could Snow White possibly want with us? Nanny wondered. Hudson shifted his weight back and forth awkwardly. And the page, ma'am, he says the message is from Queen Snow White and her mother. It wasn't like Hudson to ask questions, especially about royalty, but he couldn't stop himself. Ma'am, has Queen Snow White lost her senses? Everyone knows the legend of the old queen's demise. Please excuse my impertinence, but... My dear Hudson, please don't concern yourself with this. I assure you, Queen Snow White hasn't lost her senses, Nanny said firmly. Yes, ma'am, Hudson said nervously. He didn't look at all comfortable with the knowledge that the infamous Queen Grimmauld somehow still inhabited this world. The old queen's disposition had changed since her death. Hudson, please don't worry, Nanny said. Hudson gave Nanny a look she had grown accustomed to, a look of pure awe, because she had read his thoughts. I'll take that message now, Hudson, if you don't mind, Nanny said with a coy smile. Hudson fumbled for the message and placed it in Nanny's outstretched hand. Of course. I'm sorry, he stammered. Please, Hudson, don't worry. Why don't you go downstairs for a nice cup of tea? I think it will do you some good. Poor Hudson, Cersei said with a laugh as the witches walked away. What does the letter say? Let me see, Nanny said. Cersei looked on, analyzing the expression on Nanny's face rather than reading her thoughts. Clearly the queens weren't sending good news. It seems your sisters left a book at the old queen's castle during one of the visits when Snow was still a small girl, Nanny explained. A book of fairy tales. Apparently, the old queen used to read this book to Snow when she was little. And there was a story about a dragon witch who puts a young woman to sleep for her own protection. They're wondering now, with everything going on with Aurora and Maleficent, if this book foretold their story. Cersei didn't know what to make of that, but Nanny continued before she can question it. The part that is most concerning to them is that this book seems to be predicting everyone's stories, not just Aurora's, but Snow's, Ariel's, Tulip's, Cinderella's, even yours. The old queen and Snow White are worried the book is spellbound. Cersei didn't even want to think about what it would mean if her sisters had spellbound the book. Do you think it is? Spellbound? No. I think I know this book. I think it is simply a recording of time. It's not prophecy or spell work. I don't think even your sisters would do such a thing. Cersei wasn't as sure. If my sisters did spellbind that book, Queen Grimmauld will want revenge. Everyone will. Nanny shuddered at the notion. If the Odd Sisters had spellbound the book, not even Cersei would be able to protect them from the repercussions of the grievous misdeeds. We need to see this book, Cersei. Can you write to Snow White and ask her to send it? The only way to know if the book is spellbound is for you to look at it. If your sisters have done this, Cersei cut her off, it would be devastating. Nanny felt a terrible chill as she thought about the destruction the Odd Sisters had caused over the years. She felt a tugging in her heart that she hadn't felt in longer than she'd like to recollect. She wondered if they should even bring the Odd Sisters back. She had promised to help Cersei wake them simply because that was what Cersei wished, and Nanny wanted nothing more to do than to make Cersei happy. But would that really be the best thing for Cersei? Would Cersei ever truly be happy with her sisters in the world, inflicting death and destruction on everything they touched? Cersei would spend the rest of her long life righting her sisters' wrongs and helping those her sisters hurt. Would she ever reach her full potential in their shadows? Nanny was heartbroken in the wake of that revelation. I can't refuse to help her now. I can't go back on my word, even if it would be the best thing for Cersei if her sisters stayed asleep. Cersei's face filled with grief. She had heard Nanny's thoughts and felt betrayed by them. How could you? Cersei cried as all the color drained from Nanny's face. Nanny hadn't meant for Cersei to hear what she was thinking. I want only to protect you, Cersei. I promise, she insisted. Cersei stood silently, not knowing what to say. She felt numb and close to tears. She couldn't look Nanny in the eye. I think I will go home, write to Snow White, and ask her more about this book, Cersei said. Besides, I think I could use a change of scenery. Chapter 15. The Witches in the Mirrors. In the time Aurora had been in the dream realm, she had never been able to speak with anyone who appeared in the mirrored chamber. She was always just an observer. And now that she was speaking with someone in this lonely, dreary place, it had to be these women, these witches, these bizarre, raving lunatics who could hardly understand. "Oh, that isn't nice, princess. Not nice at all." "Yes, watch your manners, dear." "Didn't your stupid fairy godmothers teach you manners?" Aurora didn't know what to say. She still wasn't entirely convinced that the witches were actually speaking to her. She remembered one night when she was watching her cousin, Tulip. She could have sworn that Tulip was talking directly to her, but it turned out she was talking to her cat, Flans. Aurora had felt silly for answering Tulip, and she'd promised herself she wouldn't make that mistake again. "Oh, we're talking to you, princess." "Oh, yes, we are." Aurora narrowed her eyes at the witches in the mirror. "Oh, yes, Aurora, we see you." The two witches in the left and the right mirrors were waving manically, eyes bulging as they smiled at her like mad women. Even though they all looked exactly alike, the witch in the middle somehow seemed older than the other two. She wasn't joining in their antics. She just stood there, staring right at Aurora, taking her measure. "So you're the Princess Aurora. Maleficent will be so pleased that we found you." Who are you? And how do you know Maleficent?" Aurora said hesitantly. "My name is Lucinda, and these two rather animated witches are my sisters, Ruby and Martha. As for Maleficent, well, she is a very old friend of ours," the witch in the middle replied. Aurora studied the odd sisters. The women were clearly magical, but Aurora sensed that their powers were limited by the twilight magic of their dreamscape. "Are you Circe's sisters?" the princess asked, putting it together. She had been a beautiful young witch named Circe at Morningstar Castle with her cousin, Princess Tulip. Circe had been fretting over her sisters, who were trapped in the land of dreams. "How does the sleeping Rose know our little sister?" Ruby screamed, her face contorting itself horribly. Lucinda shot her sister an evil glare, silencing her. "Don't squawk, Ruby, and let's please try to talk plainly and in a straight line for the princess here. This place is confusing enough without us adding to the bedlam." "Oh no, are we doing that again, Lucinda? Please tell us we don't have to," Ruby and Martha yelled. "Tell us how you know our sister," Ruby snarled, making Aurora jump back in fright. "Stop this, Ruby, and let the girl answer the question," Lucinda scolded her. Clearly, Lucinda is in charge of the other two, the princess thought. "She's not in charge," squeaked Martha, reading Aurora's mind. "Oh, you know she's in charge. She always has been," said Ruby. "Sisters, please, let the girl speak. She's going to tell us about our sister," Lucinda said. "Well, I wasn't, actually. It seems to me, since I have information you want, it might be better to keep it to myself," Aurora said bravely. Lucinda smirked slightly. I see. What happened next was entirely unexpected. Lucinda stepped through the mirror like a specter from the fathoms of death, her long, bony hands grabbing at the princess. Terrified, Aurora fell backward onto the ground, suddenly seized by a terrible burning sensation within her. The three sisters cackled. "Careful, dear. You haven't discovered all the magic in this place, or the magic within your own soul. Now tell us what you know about our little sister."
Is that not the weirdest feeling? And it was kind of all over the place this time. It kind of feels like, when like a huge storm is about to arrive and there's all this like pent up energy just ready to burst. Like when you see those huge flashes of lightning and then you're just waiting for the thunder because you know it's going to be super huge and you get anxious. You've kind of got to wonder what Maleficent's done to be so scary. I mean, all these kingdoms are pretty afraid of her. So don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next week. And stay tuned for the next few chapters. Bye.